to the Tournament Center here at Pro Tour Dragons of Tarkir in Brussels, Belgium. I'm Brian David Marshall. I'm joined by Ian Duke. Ian, Green-White Devotion was one of the big decks in Standard. Come out of Fate Reforged.
Yeah, it sort of broke out on the Grand Prix scene following Fate Reforged release.
So, you know, Whisperwood Elementals, Mastery of the Unseen.
Yep.
Wouldn't seem like maybe there's a lot going on in Dragons of Tarkir for that, but there's actually quite a few little new tools that you get to play with.
Yeah, a lot of just interesting options, I guess, depending on how you want to metagame the deck and what you're expecting to face.
So Manifest has been before, but now we get more. Let's talk a little bit about one of the real similarities. So what we've been doing with these deck techs is sort of giving you an overview of the cards we found across a number of deck lists. Green-White Devotion is kind of a very tightly grouped list. There's not a ton of variation, and every card on this segment here is almost universal to the deck.
Yeah, this is sort of the core of the deck here, starting with Elvish Mystic as a one-drop. One of the few ways to get on the board early in the game in this standard format. Accelerates your mana, not much to be said, just a staple throughout Magic's history.
Yeah. Sylvan Caryatid, also a staple as long as it's been around. Not quite as long as the 1-mana elves, but...
Yeah, of note, also great at blocking small red creatures, which are fairly popular today in the tournament from what I've seen walking around.
And hexproof. And it's nice to have a mana accelerant that is not going to get bolted or swords or whatever things you've done to mana creatures over the long history of the game.
Yep, and talking about options for mana creatures, here we have Voyaging Satyr. There's a number of different options you could have here at the 2-drop slot, but of course in a green Devotion deck where you have Nykthos Shrine to Nyx, untapping a land can represent far more than just 1 mana, right? Sometimes 7, 9, 13, etc. Just crazy mana explosions off of Nykthos here.
And then not traditionally a mana creature so much, but a card that helps you continue to develop your mana base, sift through the top of your deck, and gain life. We talked about those red decks again.
Yeah, it's a great blocker. It's great life gain to protect you against the early aggressive decks. But notably, in a deck like Green Devotion, where you want to play a high land count and lots of mana creatures, you have the tendency to get bogged down and sort of flood out on your mana sources. Courser of Kruphix helps a lot in that regard by sort of peeling lands off the top of your deck and letting you get to your good stuff.
Yeah, so then you have all this mana, so you tend to have a bunch of big mana creatures in your deck. Let's take a look at the next batch of cards, and you see these things that we get to sink that mana into. Genesis Hydra being one of the staple cards from M15.
Yeah, so just a powerful card with a good rate. You get a nice 2-for-1 there if you have lots of mana, but as your deck really hits its strides in the later game, this can sort of act like almost a demonic tutor, right? Where you can see most of your deck and choose maybe that one-of card that's just right for that situation.
Of course, we probably need a little help from Nykthos at that point, but we'll get to that when we talk about lands. Another card that benefits from Nykthos, but honestly can just get into play around turn 5 or turn 6 off of these mana creatures, is Ugin the Spirit Dragon.
Yeah, just a hugely powerful card. 8 mana is a lot for a Planeswalker, for any card really, but what's unique about Ugin is it can really catch you up from basically any deficit, just sweeping away Abzan controls creatures or Jeskai Ascendancies and tokens, whatever it may be. Ugin's just the perfect card to catch you up.
And while on one hand it will also wipe out your mana creatures that you may have used to get there, you will tend to have a lot of face down creatures in this deck which live through Ugin, so you end up having this very advantaged board even though you might sacrifice some of your permanents.
Yeah, and we'll see that coming up with some of the other options we'll talk about from Dragons of Tarkir. There are some other face down creatures that you may want to use, and you can maybe view that as a package with Ugin.
Yeah, and then Arbor Colossus.
Yeah, in a world full of dragons, what's better than this guy? Huh?
Yeah, I was surprised this actually didn't show up in more lists that I saw. Yeah. Just because of the success of the green-red decks.
Yeah, so this is great. I mean, it serves as a Devotion enabler with triple green. It's a mana sink with its monstrosity. It blocks dragons already by itself. It kills dragons with its monstrosity. Just a great card for this metagame, I think.
Yeah. Pelucranos, the World Leader, obviously a staple card. Great at just shooting down little creatures, comes down on turn 3 a lot of the time. Yeah. And is able to just gum the board up.
And a lot of times just a 5/5 for 4 mana can put the right amount of pressure on a control deck, force them to maybe sweep your board or try to answer it in some way. And against the weenie creature decks like tokens or mono red, the monstrosity ability just really powerful.
Temur Sabertooth, a card that's sort of fallen out of favor in the deck a little bit. Still seeing play though. This was in some of the first versions of the Green Devotion decks, and it really let people combo off and do some crazy things.
Yeah, we've seen this card used in really interesting ways. I've seen versions with like Temur Ascendancy, giving your creatures haste and using this to generate, infinite mana loops and all sorts of craziness. I've also just seen it used in a fair capacity where you're using this ability to protect not only the Sabertooth, but also your other creatures by returning them to your hand, rebuying monstrosities, what have you. There's a lot of options
Turning
with
a
this
Genesis
card.
Hydra.
But definitely one that's on the fringes that some lists may use, but it's not a staple.
Yeah, not a Temur Ascendancy kind of package we're talking about here. So let's talk, we alluded a little bit to face down the creatures. These are the two big cards from the last set.
Yeah.
Whisperwood Elemental, one of my favorite cards. I cannot pass this card in Legacy Cube.
Yeah.
But in Standard, this card is just unbelievable, generates a massive board state, and gives you the ability to protect your board.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the more powerful cards in Standard. It's got a little bit of a Thragtusk quality to it, where you play it, you immediately get value. It can also protect you from sweepers with its second ability. Just a really powerful card by itself that also gives you a lot of resilience.
And then Mastery of the Unseen, this was a card people were hoping to see get broken.
Yeah.
And then when it got broken, they were like, oh, that's a lot of life. That game really bogged down, huh?
Yeah, so like a couple unique things about Master of the Unseen. For one, this is the primary reason to splash white in these Green Devotion decks, and the reason why is it just gives you a repeatable mana sink that just gives you a really good rate of return on the mana that you're spending. The life gain here helps you hold tight in a long game against things like, Jeskai Burn or Mono Red. And what's also super important about this card is it comes down on turn 2, which is too early for a lot of the control decks to stop. So if you're playing against like Black-Blue Control or Esper Control, you just play this on turn 2, and then they have a really hard time grinding you out after that.
Sure. Okay, so that's Manifest. Let's talk about some of the new toys that this deck, these were all staples. Let's talk about some of the new toys we get, specifically Deathness Raptor. This card, I love it. It exists in the intersection between Graveyard Shenanigans and Morph. This is a card I absolutely love.
Yeah, so talking about grinding people out, this is one of the grindiest cards that there is here. Death Touch means it trades with any creature. It threatens to come back from the graveyard with its second ability, and it's another Megamorph, actually, that you can play face down if you decide to run with Ugin in your Green Devotion deck. This is a card and actually a package that works really well with Ugin.
Yeah, so talk about Den Protector. So if you turn a Den Protector up for 2 mana, you can return a card from your graveyard and put Deathness Raptor back into play from your graveyard.
Right, so a card reminiscent of Eternal Witness, longtime staple, favorite of many Magic players. Den Protector, another morph, combos great with Deathmiss Raptor, and really gives you a lot of resilience against the Wrath decks, as we call them, decks employing End Hostilities or Crux of Fate. So against those sort of blue-based control decks, these two cards together can really help you recover from a sweeper.
Okay. Dromoka's Command, this is a card people have just, some of the players who are in Standard have talked about it as being just this profoundly unfair card. They're like, come on.
Yeah, I don't know if I would call it unfair. It's certainly very efficient, though. You can look at these 4 different modes and combine them in various different ways to get a number of different 2-for-1 opportunities against your opponent, whether it's blocking with a creature, adding a counter and fighting something else, or taking out an enchantment and fighting a creature. Just a really versatile card, a lot of opportunities for 2-for-1s, and with so many enchantments running around in Standard right now.
I mean, just Courser of Kruphix.
Yeah.
And Courser of Kruphix is a ubiquitous enchantment. Even decks that they're not otherwise playing enchantments, they just have the Courser.
Yep.
So you always have something to do with it.
Yeah, this is a card that R&D sort of seeded in here with the purpose of putting a little bit of pressure on enchantments, since we knew there would be a lot of strong enchantments coming out of Theros block. By the end of Khans of Tarkir block, we wanted to push those out a little bit, so we added this tournament quality enchantment removal spell.
Speaking of enchantment removal cards that also work with your Deathmiss Raptor, and maybe you can get it back with your Den Protector, and Inox Survivalist.
Yeah, this is one that's a little bit on the fringes here. We've seen Reclamation Sage used a lot. This is another option there that you could employ instead of Reclamation Sage.
The reason you would play this over Reclamation Sage is Deathmiss Raptor.
Deathmiss Raptor, yeah, absolutely.
And you gain a little bit of life, and maybe you kill their Mastery of the Unseen in the mirror. You gain some life on yours. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the mana. We've mentioned a couple times now, Nykthos Shrine to Nyx. This is a card first broke out, Pro Tour Theros, the first set it was released in Dublin, people using it in the blue decks, people using it in the black decks, but it's really shown here in these green decks.
Yep, really powerful and explosive card. Any land capable of producing multiple mana is always something to give a second look at. And we've just seen Nykthos appear in a variety of decks over the past year and a half or so. Really changes the way that you build your deck, and I think these green devotion decks are the best suited to take advantage of the mana it can produce.
So forest, plains, but let's look at some of the other non-basics that people are relying on here. Temple of Plenty, Blossoming Sands, Windswept Heath, all green-white lands. But Mana Confluence is a card that shows up quite a bit. Is that something that these decks are able to play maybe more easily because of the life gain from Master of the Unseen?
Yeah, the life gain helps. Of note, there's no allied pain lands in Standard, so this is kind of like the deck's version of that, just an extra untapped source that can add green for Elvish Mystic on turn 1 or white later.
Okay. So that's a look at the cards in Green White Devotion. Remember, tomorrow on Saturday during the day, we're going to have a text piece which goes into some of the very specific versions of this deck, and the deck lists themselves will be provided as well. So for now, this is Brian David Marshall and Ian Duke signing off from the Tournament Center.